I am super excited to welcome Russ Rosenberg back to the Terri Cole Show. He is a repeat guest because, wow, we have so much in common and so much to talk about. Welcome back, Russ.
Well, thank you, Terri. It's actually exciting to be on your show. You and I have so much in common, and more than that, I just love to hear what you have to say.
Well, we're going to be talking mostly about what you have to say today. So,
maybe next time.
You've got something really exciting that we were talking about, and then we decided you'd come back on the show, is the 50 Shades of Pathological Narcissism. So in the upfront of the show, I already talked about all the things that you do and how we met and all that stuff. But I want to talk a little bit about this project that you've been doing. So it's an 18-hour video seminar series. Tell me all about it, please.
You know, it's interesting. First of all, I have to, for full transparency, I have not read any of the 50 Shades book, just to be clear. And if I did, I don't know if it would have mattered, but anyway. Long story short, I say this tongue-in-cheek, I accidentally became an expert on narcissism. And because all along, what I was writing about was in my Human Magnet Center book and my subsequent Codependency cure work is about this healing process of codependents who fall in love with narcissists. And so I did these videos on YouTube because narcissism is a big part of it. And everyone loved them. They liked them. They became quite well viewed. And so I then delved more deeply into it. And eventually I decided I just want to be focusing on narcissism as it applies to the person that wants to heal, to get better, to overcome what I now call self-love deficit disorder, which is the name the new name for codependency. So I stopped doing anything about narcissism because I figured there are thousands of people and they're doing quite well who specialize and talk about narcissism. And I didn't want to be one of those guys, one of those people. So I stopped it. And then about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, someone said, hey, it was in Australia. They said, we love your work. We want more stuff about narcissism. I said, oh, no. And so how I reconciled this idea was I was going to do a 6-hour video on narcissism, and it's going to be about what people needed to know relative to getting healthier, to escaping, to protect. And that 6-hour video became that 6-hour project became a 12-hour project, and it became an 18-hour project. Because if I was going to talk about narcissism, I wanted it to be the complete package. So the first 6 hours is all about narcissism, what I call pathological narcissism, narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. Everything you need to know about narcissism, everything you need to know about narcissistic abuse, the tricks, the strategies, the manipulation. And that took 6 hours. Now, just to be clear, the way I do my trainings, they're just jammed filled with information. I never learned how to sing or dance, so I had just information. And so then the second one was, why do codependents or people with self-love deficit disorder always fall in love with pathological narcissists, which is about my Human Magnet Center book. And so I included why do narcissists fall in love with SLDs? Pretty much the relationship dynamic. It focused on relationships and how the pathological narcissists entrap, manipulate, and coerce, and how the SLDs or the codependents fall prey to that. And
wait a minute. Let me ask you something about this, because this piece of why is there such this profound attraction and pull between these two? Because when we're talking about narcissism, and I want to make sure that people watching this and listening are clear, that you're really, your expertise and what you're doing is really about, like you said, helping people who find themselves hopelessly trapped in these relationships. So it really is the self-love deficit people or the codependents who are really benefiting basically from your work. I just want to make sure people are clear about that. So tell me, from your perspective, your professional perspective, what is this draw between narcissists and codependents?
The Human Magnet Syndrome book explains it in every possible angle, but the simplistic explanation is it's like a dancing partnership. The dancers have to be perfectly matched in an opposite way. You have to have a leader and you have to have a follower. And the follower can predict every moment ahead of time, so she or he will allow the leader to be the star on the dance floor. Two people come together because they love to dance. Now, narcissists who need all the attention, who are selfish, self-centered, often lack empathy, who are they going to dance with? They need someone who is deferential, patient, giving, afraid to say no, emotionally and psychologically pliable and flexible. And the match is perfect, but the draw is the chemistry. And chemistry is not what we think it is. It is an unconscious, or it is directed from parts of ourselves that we're not aware of. Mm-hmm. When we meet someone, we find them attractive because they are what we know and what we are used to. And it's the representation of your childhood. So if you're an SLD or a codependent, you were raised by a narcissist and you adapted by being invisible and powerless and you were marginalized. That is your relationship template in which you know and are familiar with. And so when we meet, we match our relationship templates based upon what we learned as a child. So the Human Magnet Syndrome says that chemistry is like a magnet, the opposite attractions pull each other strongly. And if they're not matched, there's a repulsion. So when we have these SLDs or codependents who keep saying, why do I keep picking the bad boys or the women who hurt me? I just want a nice person. They don't know what to do with it because all they know is conflict, and they're drawn to the dance partner that they know, understand, are familiar with, and paradoxically feel safe.
Right. Okay. So that makes total sense to me. So if someone is listening to this and they're just getting familiar with your work, because I love The Human Magnet Syndrome, is one of my fave books, but you've got plenty of books that are amazing. But that one really speaks to the work that I do, of course.
Yes, it does.
And we'll have all links, obviously, in the show notes for everyone to get all your stuff. But if someone is listening and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm dancing this dance and I'm in pain and I am the codependent who is always assuaging the feelings of the other person and always acquiescing to what they want. What would you say? What can they do? Let's say even a first step.
Yes. And actually that's a perfect question, because now I can finish the first question. Mm-hmm. The third 6-hour part of that 50 Shades it's what to do. It's actually techniques, strategies, assignments, explanations. So, and that took 6 hours. It's now that this is a what to do question. One of the things that I've said from the beginning, which is a turnoff for a large amount of people that come across my work, it says the only way that you can change this pattern is to understand your responsibility. Now, it's not your responsibility if someone abuses you or hurts you, mm-hmm. but it's the attraction. It's the feeling stuck or frozen, or the fear of pathological loneliness, which is what holds codependence in relationships. So you cannot learn to set boundaries. You cannot learn to communicate. you can learn and set boundaries, you can communicate, you can do all the things that are so important, which you are the ultimate expert on. If the part of you is in love with a person and feels like if you leave him or her, you will be involved in this tragic loss and be consumed with loneliness. And that comes from, as I explained in my codependency cure program, what happened to you as a child being brought up by a narcissist and a codependent parent. And it requires a focus on who you are, how you became this adult that accepts scraps, accepts crumbs. And that is the basis for all my work, is to look into ourselves to figure out, why do I choose them? Why do I stay there? And get to that, because there is no rule, there's no way of thinking that can overcome the deeper unconscious focus.
Yes.
Which, by the way, is one of the reasons I loved your book, because you have also this psychodynamic element of it, which was just wonderful.
It's funny. That is an area where I feel the same about your work, and I feel like my crew really understands about what's in your basement, your unconscious mind, your subconscious mind, which is what I talk a lot about in my work, and you do too, just differently, where the understanding, because again, I do agree with you that sometimes people hear what we're saying as blame. And I know that that is not what you mean, and that the only way to shift what's happening is to have a deeper understanding. And what I love about your work, and I think I do the same, is that there's so many good reasons why people have, self-love deficit or become codependents. Good reasons, right? So it isn't like, oh my God, there's something monumentally broken in you because you did that, right? You responded to your environment. You were indoctrinated into, this is what love is. This is, like you said, love is conflict, love is pain, love is managing the crap out of other people, or at least trying to do that, and successfully and unsuccessfully, depending on who it is you're trying to manipulate. And so I think that that's an important takeaway from what you're saying. But let's say someone goes, okay, now I do understand, like I get it. I see what Ross is saying. I had a narcissistic this parent, and I saw the deep codependency from this parent who had the self-love deficit. How then, with that understanding, do we move? Because what you're talking about, the draw is so, it is chemical. And it's funny, I visualize it as energetic, like happening. We are compelled, right? It's like right?
Oh my gosh, it is. I mean, I was just listening to some young people I know. You notice how I had to quickly change?
Oh, I'm with you. Trust me.
And they were talking about, someone, they just met someone, and their eyes just were like shining, and their faces were bright. It is actually part of our species that when we meet someone and have chemistry, we go through limerence, as Dorothy Tenoff said. That is this excited, floating on air. You can't stop thinking. That's normal. And oh my gosh, does it feel good? But the SLD, the codependent, and the pathological narcissist, they are so lonely. They are so insecure, and they are so consumed with shame or core shame that it's only do they feel some relief when they're in a relationship. So we have the opposite, right? The two magnets and the dancers. And we have this energetic pull that comes from the matching of their childhood relationship templates. And all that explains it. But now consider two people that essentially don't like each other. And to some degree, especially for the pathological narcissist, they hate themselves. Of course, they don't know it. Mm-hmm. They get enveloped in this relationship. And if you throw in what is the normal limerence, it becomes like a crack cocaine, heroin, and I'm using that metaphorically. That limerence is so strong, it's as if they're feeling love for the first time, and they get lost in it. And so so that chemistry pulls lonely, sad, shameful people together and makes them feel happy and alive. But of course, it can never be stable because the SLD will eventually fall, or the codependent will fall into his or her pattern of having to lose themselves to make the other person happy. So the human magnet syndrome puts into words why it is so impossible to quit this, to stop that. It actually came from my own experience that there was no book out there. There was no therapy on codependency. It didn't work. None of it worked because they were working on the symptoms and not the cause.
Okay, so why is that? Why, or why do you think that?
Oh, that's right. That's right. You asked me what to do.
That's all right.
So I created an 11-stage treatment program. It took a while, and it went from 3, 4, 7, 9, and now it is at 11. And it is like any other treatment program. So if you are an alcoholic, you go to a treatment program, and there are certain stages, and not to be confused with the 12-step program.
Mm-hmm.
And it involves probably anywhere from 9 months to about a year and a half. And by the way, it is not this grueling year and a half. Once people get into it, they fall in love with themselves. They fall in love with their life. And so each step specifically addresses in a very logical direction what you need to do in order to get to the next step, to eventually at the higher steps, which are self-love abundance, which is the cure or the opposite. And I don't know if you want me to go through the 11 stages, but it'll suffice to say the feeling of accomplishment, the feeling of hope, the feeling of something tangible. Because the people that come to me have been in therapy often for most of their adult life, and nothing has worked. And the focus on themselves and their family of origin and everything that goes into it, which is why I created that the third day of my 50 Shades was people wanting to know what to do. Because I have not written my book, The Codependency Cure, yet, which actually says what to do.
Right.
But I wish I could give you a really quick answer on what to do, other than, which is my stage 2, is learn as much as you can about the problem, and not only how you, or the SLD was a victim, but how you played a role in it. And once you can wrap your arms around it, it actually gives people hope. There are people that get mad at me. Like, what do you mean it's my fault? How dare you blame me? They're not ready. They're so filled with anger, but there is this feeling of peace and excitement that there is a path forward. And so I'm going to stop there, because if you can be more specific, I can then go into, each, or I can give you a quick naming of each of the stages.
I would actually love a quick naming of each of the stages, because I think that would be really helpful. And then we'll tell people where they can take the course or find the rest of it. Go.
Okay, so the first stage is hitting bottom and reaching out for help or hope. And that's just getting into my office or another person's office and knowing that there's a way forward. The second stage is learning and absorbing the human magnet syndrome and codependency cure information. And that goes to the part of what we talked about, is you have to learn everything about you, your life, your family. Why did this happen? Why are you attracted to narcissists? Why? It's like an upload of information, because this whole program relies on someone to be empowered and not to just trust the therapist, but to know it. The third addresses the addiction, and as codependency is an addiction. trust me, every codependent I know that wants to break up with their narcissist, will act just as like an alcoholic, someone trying to stop smoking cigarettes. They come up with the most ridiculous explanations for why they go back. Sometimes they don't even know, and the pain it's this bone aching pathological loneliness. The next stage is understanding, and I forgot the name of the stage, but understanding, and it's about gaslighting. Understand gaslighting is crucial because every SLD was raised by narcissistic parent who told them how to think and how to be and conditioned them to be someone else other than themselves. And that is so often present in every SLD narcissist relationship. So that in itself is hugely important. The next stage is starting to build social environments and community. You can't really move forward if you're alone. And whether that's Codependency Anonymous, a church group, a reading group, playing, as I did, playing pool, going bowling. The next stage is preparing for the narcissistic storm. And so the stage after that is setting boundaries in a hostile environment. That is when the proverbial it's when the stuff hits the fan.
It's when the crap hits the fan.
Yeah, crap hits the fan. And there are so many people at stage 6 setting boundaries in a hostile environment that do it and fail, that I created a stage, which is probably the most important stage, is being able to predict everything that will happen, what the narcissist will do, what you'll do. And if you can understand and prepare for it, that when you go from stage 5 is preparing for the storm to stage 6, setting boundaries, then you are not going to fail.
Wait, can I say something about stage 6? I love stage 6 because what I find in my therapy practice and in my courses is that people will say, well, how do I set boundaries with no pushback? I'm like, well, I don't know. I don't think you can, but you can be prepared and you can anticipate within a certain margin of error what that personality, how they're going to respond, and you, because you are such a veritable expert in this in this subject, and you've had so much experience, it's so helpful because if someone says, hey, you're going to start this, and these are some of the things you should expect, you are so much less likely to be like, abort the mission, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, that's what he said was going to happen. Okay, moving on. 7.
Actually, throughout my program, I remind people what I call my Surgeon General warning. It's not a pack of cigarettes that says, if you smoke, you get emphysema. Mine is that if you continue in this form of treatment, you will lose between 75 and 85% of the people you thought you loved or you thought loved you. And it seems a lot, but if all of your relationships required you to be silent, invisible, whether people are your SLDs or codependents, SLDs or narcissists, they're not going to be connected to you because you've changed. I will say often that boundaries don't work with narcissists. I don't care if it's from the most brilliant person in the world, say Terri Cole. I got her book over there, by the way. But if everything inside of you wants to break it down, or somehow empower the person to whom you're setting the boundary, you have to be able to be strong enough. So that stage, preparing for the narcissistic storm. Stage 7 is setting boundaries, and that is when the stuff hits the fan. And in all of these stages, you are learning techniques and strategies.
And being able to identify, because I know your work, being able to identify the manipulation tactics that are employed, so that instead of when the person goes, I can't believe you're such a mean person or whatever when they're trying to manipulate you out of being mad at them when they've done something horrendous. Instead of being like, what do you mean I'm a bad person? You're like, oh, look, I see they're flipping the script. This is one of the manipulation tactics. I see you, like I see it happening. I'm not a bad person. They're trying to get out of taking responsibility for what they did.
Yeah, and by the time you get to that point, you actually know, well, that's gaslighting.
Yeah.
That's projection.
Yeah.
That's a narcissistic injury. And then, of course, I have this technique I created called the observe, don't absorb technique that specializes in that. And that is why that third part of the 50 Shades has all of those techniques and strategies. Each one of the stages has dozens of strategies.
Yep.
And then the next one is what I call healing the inner trauma child, or the Hitch method, where I move deeper into the person's background and connect to that part of them that they don't remember, the disassociated trauma.
Yeah.
A lot like PTSD, but profoundly more pervasive. And you cannot overcome self-love deficit disorder, aka codependency, if you don't solve that trauma that happened to you as a child. Invariably, 95%, every SLD I know, including myself, and is they had a horrendously traumatic childhood with really harmful parents. Stage 9 is achieving self-love abundance, which is the most remarkable stage. It is when your self-love deficit disorder is neutralized. It's gone. Every time I say that, still I get goosebumps. Mm-hmm. It's so weird. I get it. I have to think about that. But it is because everything about my program is logical. That's built on various different types of psychological theory and steps and techniques. You aren't carrying the burden anymore. Your attraction patterns are different. Your dance preferences are different. You now carry what I call a narcometer, which is this inner meter that will tell you if someone is hurtful or safe. And then the next stage is taking self-love abundance into a self-love abundant mutual relationship. Now you take it into relationships. And that is hard, because no matter how healthy you are at this point, you still have never had a relationship with healthy people. You got to learn, like riding a bike. And the final stage is you get to the self-driven, self-love abundant lifestyle. And that is about the time you is what I call the codependency cure. And that's why I call it a cure, because there's no self-love deficit disorder anymore. Now, you still have problems. I mean, that's human.
Sure.
But you don't trip yourself.
Right.
So that would be the short version.
I love that so much. I want to talk a little bit about the, I guess it's 10, where you're getting into a healthy relationship. Mm-hmm. And because I agree with what you're saying, that, listen, we learn all of these things. And in my therapy practice, people could be learning, but it always is when they get into a relationship. This is where the rubber hits the road as to learning to actually employ these things and being mindful enough to see, oh, look, that's old behavior. Like I'm over functioning, or I'm mind reading what the person wants, or whatever it is. And being healthy enough within yourself to become the observer of your behavior, not like a super duper judge, not Judge Judy, not being super mean to yourself, right? Yeah. Just going, I see what is happening. I have this desire. And when they get to this point in your program, they're like, and I'm not going to do it. Maybe I'll talk about it. Maybe I'll, there's so many other healthy choices that you learn when you really do start healing these core injuries that you're talking about, that there are many behavioral choices that are not making yourself less than or overgiving to the point of complete depletion and exhaustion. And a healthy relationship will not even tolerate that, right? Like a healthy relationship will be like, chill, man. Like I can do things, And that's in a sense the human magnet syndrome is, if people are SLDs and they meet someone healthy,
there's a lot of discomfort on both sides, and there's repulsion. If as you change, grow, and heal, and you move forward to self-love abundance, you have this unconscious repulsion, and that's how relationships work, whether you're healthy or not. And I like what you said, because when you get past the trauma and you get to the point where you aren't held down by the weights of your past, that is when learning, and changing the way you think, because there's still all sorts of psychological things at play. And that is where really good psychotherapy helps. But because SLDD doesn't respond to regular psychotherapy in the beginning, it always fails. But at this point, learning everything that you need to know about your thoughts, your communication patterns, your preferences, your discomforts, that is when you get a chance to actually resolve these. And you're not pulling yourself down despite your efforts to outgrow them.
And how incredibly liberating is that moment where so many people in my courses and in my private practice have been so dutiful, have done so much. And it can be really depressing if talk therapy isn't doing it. If just sort of understanding what happened, or like, I had a crappy childhood, okay, fine, like people saying that, that isn't enough when you're talking about what you're talking about and what you specialize in. And I also think that there's a lot of clinicians who don't know about this at all. And so that also is a problem with people going to therapists, that they're doing the right thing, and they could be talking for years and years and be like, why am I still in this painful cycle though?
Or why, despite everything I've learned and read and willed myself to learning, why do I still feel lonely? Or why do I have no sexual or romantic attraction to the person that's really nice to me?
Talk more about that, please, can you?
Oh, absolutely. It goes back to the relationship template. As adults, everything we know about our preferences for romantic partners, it comes from what we know about love, communication, and relationships as a child. And if you were born in a super dysfunctional family where you could only be seen if you shut up, or you became the gift or trophy child, you learn that love only happens when you mold yourself into a lovable object while losing yourself. That experience is not just, one part of a childhood, it is the whole childhood. So the term used is attachment trauma. And so with that attachment trauma, like other trauma, it's so painful. It's stored in the back of our mind, just like PTSD. So when you're an adult and you start to date, and say, you're in college or post high school, and there's this really nice guy who's a great listener and he's really generous, you will feel uncomfortable and you won't know why, because it just makes you nervous and you don't know what to do. And by the way, it could be women or whatever. But now the next guy you meet, who's kind of like bossy and arrogant and bragging, that is exciting and it feels familiar because you can navigate that in your sleep. And that's the human magnet center attraction, the dance partnership. It's the chemistry that is the reiteration of the relationship template you learned as a child, which is why at stage, I recently changed it from 10 to 11. So I actually got it on my screen. That is why at stage 8, the trauma healing part of the treatment program is so important, because you can't change that if you can't get to it. So you need someone who knows how to get to that disassociated unconscious trauma.
Right. So good. So what do you think about, this will be the last question on this, but I'm curious. So what do you think about trauma bonded relationships? I mean, do you feel like this is a description of that?
Oh, yeah. I remember back when I was training to be a sex addiction treatment provider, there's a lot of talk about trauma bonding. So trauma bonding can be seen two ways. It can be seen according to the way I described, is that you are bonded with a person whose former trauma resonates with yours. And every SLD I know will tell you this, and I'll tell you it. When you say you go on a date and you meet someone and they start talking about pain and sadness, it almost excites the SLD. It makes them feel something like they can help you.
Yep.
They don't know where it came from. All they know is they feel love. And so it is the unconscious trauma of the SLD interacting with the unconscious trauma of the narcissist that brings them together. Now, if we talk about the trauma bonding that most people are familiar with, is the subsequent or consequent trauma of the fights, the arguments, the breakups, the struggle, and the insecurities. That trauma somehow bonds them because not only do they hurt each other, but they find a way to come back to each other.
Right.
So it's the beginning of pain and it's the resolution. And that is, to them, the glue of the relationship. Whereas for someone who's healthy, it would be the fissure or the breaking apart of it.
Yes, I definitely am of the school of what you first said, in that I feel like we recognize people. We unconsciously and energetically recognize those. And with trauma bonding, exactly as you described it, at least this is what I've seen in my practice, where it's like, you see that person and you're like, oh,
right.
I recognize your pain, and it makes me think that you are appropriate mating material. I feel something that, like you said, I don't understand, but it is compelling. And
so that's the inner voice that most SLDs don't hear, but it's loud. The outer voice is, oh my God, he is hot. He's exciting. She is so interesting and beautiful. But it really, those two voices are interacting, but we only hear the good stuff because we don't want to, we work really hard. Our brain works really hard to keep us from not thinking of our trauma that preceded the relationships.
Yes. Okay, so I want to know, because we're coming to the end of our time, I want to know, where can people get a hold of the pathological narcissism stuff? What is the format of that? And I get the hours, but how do people get it?
Okay, so everything that I do that's available to the public, as far as education, seminars, books, you can find it at selfloverecovery.com.
Okay.
I became a black screen. Selfloverecovery.com.
Yeah.
And there, or you can write us at help@selfloverecovery.com, and we will help you find the resource that will best fit your needs.
Got it. Okay. So right now, where can people find you the most? Because I know YouTube for sure. You've got an amazing YouTube channel that is just chock full of awesomeness.
Thank you.
Where else?
So no, it's selfloverecovery.com or YouTube. YouTube.com/Ross Rosenberg. That is where most of my work can be found. There's also a blog that I have that's associated with selfloverecovery.com. So if you put blog in your Google search engine, blog Ross Rosenberg or blog Self Love Recovery, you'll find that, and that's where I post articles that I wrote and other interesting bits of information or education.
Excellent. I want to say thank you so much, my friend, for spending so much time with us today. I'm just always so excited and sort of motivated after we talk. I'm like, I'm going to look into that and I'm going to watch that. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We'll say to be continued. You guys listening and watching, everything you need to know about Ross Rosenberg will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Terry.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Hold on. Don't go anywhere.